Paul's answer to the greatest human problem in the world, namely the sinful guilt of all humans before a holy God, is that God Himself provided a righteousness, not our own, a righteousness, which He would credit to or impute to us if we would trust Christ and receive it as our treasure. Look at chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. But to the one who does not work, but believes, there's faith, believes Him who justifies, sets right with God, justifies the ungodly, his faith is credited as righteousness. Verse 6, just as David also speaks of a blessing on the man to whom God credits righteousness apart from works. Notice that enormously important word, credits. This is where we get the doctrine of imputation. Another word for credit is reckon or count or impute. Faith is the instrument or the channel through which that righteousness is credited to us. Now here's the question. To fill out the gospel. Whose righteousness is it? If you die this afternoon, awesome thought. To face the judge this afternoon, the judge of the universe, infinite, flaming holiness. What's your claim going to be? You're a sinner. There's not a righteous person in this room. Everybody in this room is ungodly, sinful, bringing disrepute upon Jesus every day and probably every hour of every day by virtue of falling short of loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So what are you going to say? Whose righteousness will commend you to God? That's a really important question. And the gospel in the book of Romans is written to reveal to you the answer to that question. Let's read it, chapter 3, verse 21. But now apart from the law, the righteousness of God, there's your answer, has been manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, namely, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. Chapter 10, verse 3. Not knowing about God's righteousness that was just referred to in 3:21 and 22. Not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking therefore to establish their own. Don't do that. After this moment, you should not be ignorant and therefore should not fall into a self-righteousness effort. You can't do it. There is no righteousness you can ever perform that will commend you to Him. Forget that. Don't make the mistake of chapter 10, verse 3. Being ignorant, not knowing the righteousness of God, they sought to establish their own and did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God. What does that mean? What does that look like? Right there in your pew, right now, how are you doing that? Or are you? Are you subjecting yourself right now to the righteousness of God? Or are you construing your attendance in this room as the establishment of a righteousness which will get the smile of God on your side? What is the subjection to the righteousness of God? Don't make up an answer. Get it from the Bible. It's in verse 4. For the end or the goal of the law is Christ for righteousness to everyone who believes. That's the literal word-for-word translation. For whom? To whom? Believers. So if you ask now, what does it mean to subject yourself to the righteousness of God in verse 3? Answer, the law that you're all trying to keep, establish your own righteousness. He's talking to somebody who's doing that. You're all trying to keep this law and establish your righteousness. Don't you understand the law, the goal, to tell us the end of the law is Christ for righteousness. So the subjecting of yourself to the righteousness of God is the recognition that God's righteousness is Christ for righteousness. Christ worked out our righteousness. Christ is the manifestation of God's righteousness. Christ is the performance of God's righteousness. And the law is pointing to that. That's the goal. That's the end. So when you look at the law, be sure you don't fixate there and begin to use it to establish your righteousness. Let it point you to what it's all about. Christ for righteousness. And then how do you get that? For everyone who, finish it, believes. This is the gospel. This is the book of Romans. There's not a righteous person in this room this morning. And we're all going to die. And we're all going to stand before an absolutely righteous, holy, perfect, flaming God of holiness who cannot tolerate sin in His presence. And if anybody will be accepted, it will be because they believe and therefore have imputed to them an alien righteousness, not their own, Christ's. 2 Corinthians 5:21 goes like this. God made Christ, who knew no sin, to be sin for our sakes, so that in Him, and you get in Him by faith, so that in Him you might become the righteousness of God. Now don't miss the parallel here. It is so absolutely crucial that you understand you're becoming righteousness the way He became your sin. Don't get this wrong. How did He become sin? He did not sin when He became sin. And you are not righteous when you become righteous. Chapter 4, verse 5, He justifies the ungodly. Thank you. He justifies the ungodly. So, just as Jesus was credited with my sin, I get credited with His righteousness. As through one man's disobedience, that's Adam, many were made or constituted or appointed sinners, even so through the obedience of one, Christ, through the obedience of one, many will be now made righteous. That's Romans. That's Romans.